All right, we are going to read. I'm going to give you a reading from Jacinda, The Untold Stories by David Cohen and Rebecca Keeler. Now, I just want to, this is just purely a personal aside. I've known David Cohen for a while. We had a slight falling out. I'm not quite sure why. And David Cohen is the sort of guy who carries a grudge. And he's clearly got a grudge on me because I'm going through this book. He has talked to everyone involved in politics and media except me. And as I go through this book, and there are issues that clearly were raised by me and raised by the platform, issues that most of New Zealand didn't know about until we got into them. But did he come and talk to me about those issues or why I raised them? No, because he's a little bit, he's still got the pip, David. You'll get over it, mate, and I don't care. But I thought I'd mention it. Now, here is a passage about an issue when the platform was set up that we really highlighted, that most people, including David Cohen, weren't aware of. But I'll just read it. Shortly after New Zealand emerged, this is page 76 of the book, which is available at bookshops, but you should go to the centrist website to get it. It's selling fast. Shortly after New Zealand emerged from the first national COVID lockdown, the Labour-led government's genial broadcasting minister, Chris Farfoy, told me that help was on the way. A lot of shifting sands had settled on the media business, he said, and if something couldn't be done to shore up the local market, there might not be much of a private media sector to talk about, which could only be bad news for local democracy. Ardern was determined to halt and reverse the slide, he said. Ardern's solution was what became known as the Public Interest Journalism Fund, or the PIJF. She said that $55 million would be spent over the next 3 years to provide ongoing support for public interest journalism to be produced and shared through local media outlets. We cannot afford to have our journalistic integrity compromised by being unable to fund and run both decent journalism and broadcasting, she had explained. The fund, to be administered by New Zealand On Air, would ensure such journalism continued to play its role in sharing the stories that kept New Zealanders informed, as well as supporting a healthy democracy by holding voices of influence to account. God, it was a crock. The choice of words here was slightly odd. Doesn't the news media traditionally hold governments to account rather than people who simply speak well or possibly hold dissenting views? Nevertheless, the intent seemed commendable enough in the face of it and gave the straightened Times certainly the straightened media certainly a lifeline, starting immediately with the $10 million available to be dispensed in 2020-2021, $25 million for the following year, and another $20 million going into 2023. The small print, however, warranted attention. In addition to establishing their credentials as news-gathering operations, applicants were required to show a clear and obvious commitment or intent for commitment to the Treaty of Waitangi, including in particular a commitment to the Māori language. According to New Zealand On Air, such an undertaking would enhance public interest journalism, resulting in stronger Māori representation and greater bicultural collaboration within the wider journalism sector. In the first of the fund's guidelines for grants, prospective applicants were told they needed to show how their project would actively promote the principles of partnership, participation, and active protection. The guidelines went on to define where the fund was most keen on, namely content made by, for, and about Māori that prioritises the perspectives, issues, needs, and interests of Māori. As well as the requirements to access the new tax-funded lifeline, included a proven commitment to presenting the treaty as a partnership, a term redolent with policy implications that are hotly disputed by the public at large, and were so even within the Ardern government's own circles. The PIJF guidelines reference New Zealand On Air's follow-up guide to Treaty Framework for News Media as its final word, insisting that applicants acknowledge that Māori never ceded sovereignty to Britain or any other state, and that our society has a foundation of institutional racism. Obviously, this was signing on to a radical position far removed from the non-ideological wage subsidies that most businesses accepted in order to weather the first of the big COVID lockdowns. Yet there was no shortage of takers and fewer surprises when 40% of the first allocations went to projects deemed as fitting under the rubric of Māori journalism. Broadly, the fund supported directly paying for staff in newsrooms around the country, funding industry development projects such as cadetships with an emphasis on hiring Māori and diverse recruits, and especially approved journalism projects. Oliver Hartwich from the New Zealand Initiative described the PIJF as a complete mistake that damaged the media's credibility and hastened the migration of audiences towards alternative and social media. He argues that the optics of media organisations accepting government funding were terrible and that the government's conditions on the fund made it appear as if journalists were compromised. Good session. Good section from the book, Jacinda, The Untold Stories. It tells you, actually, the circumstances under which the platform was born. And when we began, 3.5 years ago, we said we don't take government funding. And to be honest, the platform was largely responsible for people learning about the PIJF, and we were responsible for much of the public debate about it, though David seems to have missed that in his book, doesn't he? Don't you, David? That's all right. No hard feelings, mate. If you've still got a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, that's your problem, not mine. But really, that's when I say Jacinda, The Untold Stories is a great book by David Cohen and Rebecca Kelo, because it does look at the environment, the real things that Jacinda Ardern did that damaged this country. And the PIJF was one of them. It was clearly a propaganda tool. And our mainstream media have not recovered from it, nor do I believe they will. But the culture that Jacinda Ardern created included the culture of transgenderism and included the culture of the BSA trying to take the platform down. And how is that going now that Jacinda is gone?